The Strange Case of Donald Trump with a leading professor of psychology and an expert on President Trump. This is Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Dan McAdams, renowned psychologist who pioneered the study of lives, examined the central personality traits, values, motives, and cultural factors that together have shaped President Trump's psychological makeup. Professor McAdams is the Wade Rogers Professor of Psychology, Director of the Foley Center for the Study of Lives at Northwestern University, author of George W. Bush and the Redemptive Dream, a psychological portrait in the art and science of personality development. During the 2016 election, he wrote a noted cover story in the June Atlantic magazine, for which he was a guest on our show, The Mind of Donald Trump, a Psychologist's Guide to an Extraordinary Personality, and his timely new book, in 2020 re-election year. Joining us, I saw almost exactly 4 years from his first time with us, The Strange Case of Donald J. Trump, a Psychological Reckoning. Welcome back for the third time, Dan.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
It's amazing how fast time flies in Trump here. It's been 4 years since you first came on. This strangeness of Donald J. Trump, that's kind of a strange psychological term, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess it's not technically a psychological term. But one of the points I want to get across in the book is that, he's a lot stranger than any regular psychological category you can find anywhere. And throughout, I'm always emphasizing the enigma, the mystery, and the strangeness of this case.
What does reckoning mean?
A reckoning is a coming to terms with, okay? And there's a certain sense in which it involves looking back. Even though I'm writing about Trump during his presidency, I feel we know enough now, we have enough background and so forth, that we can get some perspective and look back on this phenomenon, this very odd, strange creature who has sort of dominated the planet for a few years now. What do we make of him, and how do we understand ourselves in that context?
Okay, it seems like one of your core assumptions is referring to him as the episodic man, which is kind of appropriate since he made his re-comeback on The Apprentice, which is episodes. But what exactly do you mean?
Yes. So to understand that, you have to understand how most people act and how he is so different. Okay, for almost every other adult on the planet, there is a story that lies at the center of that person's consciousness. People have in their minds narratives about how they came to be and where their lives are going. And these stories put together our memories of the past and our expectations of the future. And we see ourselves as characters in an unfolding narrative over time. All of us, that is, except for Donald Trump. Trump doesn't have this. We call this idea a narrative identity. He doesn't have a narrative identity from what I can tell. Instead, he lives in the moment, in the emotionally vibrant, powerful moment, a moment that he needs to win. So when Mr. Trump wakes up every morning, it's almost as if it's not just a new day, it's a new life. Okay, he's ready to go to fight a new battle, whatever that battle is. And he fights that battle that day, whether it's against Nancy Pelosi or whether it's against somebody who tweeted something he didn't like, or whether it's against some foreign power. He fights that battle with everything he's got. And then he's done. And then he goes to bed and he wakes up the next day, and voila, it's a new life. It's a new battle. It's a new moment. And these individual battles or fights, or you could even see them as deals, each one of them is separate from the next, and they don't add up. They don't create a long-term story. So he can say one thing on Monday, he can say the opposite on Wednesday, and on Friday, he'll not even remember what he said on Monday and Wednesday, because it's as if somebody else said them, as if they were part of a different life. This makes him both unpredictable in a positive way and also maddeningly problematic in a negative way. On the positive side, many people, his supporters, love this about him. They love that he's so in the moment. He's so authentic and powerful. He brings it all there right at the moment. He's not hiding anything. I mean, he may hide his taxes, but he doesn't hide parts of himself. He just explodes in your face in a kind of primal way. And that's appealing to many people. Politicians never do that except for Donald Trump. On the negative, I mean, how do you govern if you don't have a long-term plan? How do you think about things in the long run? Mr. Trump can't do that. He's not strategic at all. He doesn't have a long-term view. Instead, it's let's fight this battle right now and win it. It's all about tactics.
One of the things it seems to me the pandemic has exposed is exactly what you just said. He didn't seem to have a way to manage the pandemic. It was one day I'm a wartime president, the next day it's going away, the next day it's a hoax, the next day and I think that's what basically finally potentially maybe shot him down, because it looks so incompetent. But you say for some reason he's unable to do that.
Yeah, Jim, I think you hit the nail on the head there. The virus is the perfect foe for Donald Trump in the sense that, first of all, it's not a person, all right? A virus is a thing. It's not and Trump fights people, and he beats them down again and again every day. But more importantly, the virus is here for the long run. It's part of a long-term narrative. And Trump doesn't know how to cope with that. So early on in the crisis, back in February and March, Trump was saying things like, it's just a temporary moment in time. We'll wake up tomorrow and it will be gone. Because that's kind of how Donald Trump lives. He wakes up the next day and it's all new. But of course, the virus isn't listening. It doesn't act that way. And it's here for the long run. So Trump has a very difficult time marshaling the forces that would be needed to take on a long-term sort of foe like this. I've always thought that, should we ever get into a war? Now, I hadn't thought about this kind of war, but I was thinking of a more conventional sort of war. Trump would be a horrible commander-in-chief because he wouldn't be strategic. He wouldn't be able to take any kind of long-term perspective. He's a sprinter. He'll go for 50 yards and then he's done. And you need a long-distance runner for something like that. So, yeah, the situation we're in now is so difficult, and any president, Democrat or Republican, would be really struggling. But Mr. Trump is uniquely ill-equipped to fight this problem.
He has no inner life whatsoever?
Virtually none. And I fought this for a long time. When I wrote the piece in The Atlantic 4 years ago, I thought, I try to normalize him. A lot of people said, well, you made him into a human being. And I think, yeah, I tried to, right? But there are certain ways in which he's not. That is to say, he's not a full-fledged person in the sense that he's always on. He's always playing a role. One person remarked many years ago that in a meeting with Trump, it was like so weird because I'm sitting across from Donald Trump and it's as if it's Donald Trump playing Donald Trump, right? It's like it's an actor playing a role, but he was always in character, and like there was something weird and not real about it. However, that is who he is and how he is, and that is how he is actually weirdly authentic, a perfectly authentic fake. He's always playing the role. So let's say, well, let's get behind the role. What's going on in his head, right? There's some sort of inner life there. No, he's immersed in the role. He's not thinking about other things. He's not struggling with all the kinds of things you and I struggle with. He doesn't have any moral quandaries. He doesn't have any inner ambivalences like most human beings. He's much more primal than that. And I think some people find that very appealing. He cuts through all of the crap that all the rest of us humans have to deal with. We have all kinds of emotional difficulties and ambiguities and like, should I do this or should I do that? Do I want this for my life? Do I want that for my life? What do I really feel? He doesn't ask those questions. He's never asked those questions. And in a sense, we could all kind of remember being like that, maybe when we were really little, okay, first grade, kindergarten. Yeah, I guess life was simpler then, but that's kind of how it still is for Mr. Trump.
We got about a minute to go in this segment. Mark Singer, who wrote a New Yorker profile that I read and you mentioned, Trump has an existence unmolested by the rumblings of a soul. Is he conscience free?
Yes, he is conscience free. And I would not have said that 4 years ago when I wrote the Atlantic piece. He's not just conscience free, he's a lot of things free. There's a lot of things in our minds, a lot of inner turmoil that we all deal with, and Mr. Trump doesn't. And so without a narrative in your head about who you are and how you came to be and what your life means, if you don't have that, you don't have a conscience either, because our stories ground us in a moral sort of sense. And Trump is free of that. If you can call it a soul, I call it a story.
We'll be right back in our second segment with Dan McAdams, more on looking at Trump through the lens of psychology. We're excited to announce we've got Jim Campbell Radio now on YouTube. It's got all of our business talk with Jim Campbell, our forensic talk with Jim Campbell, all in one site. All you have to do is search Jim Campbell Radio, and then please subscribe so you'll be in touch with every new show. Our guest, professor of psychology at Northwestern, Dan McAdams. In getting back to who is Donald Trump, and you explore this in your book, it is kind of interesting that he had a rather, at least on the surface, rich, cushy upbringing in Jamaica, Queens. But yet somehow he inhabits this world that he thinks is vicious, full of killers, a dangerous world. Where does all this come from?
That's a great question, and it's something that's troubled me for a long time. You're exactly right. I mean, Donald Trump grew up in the lap of luxury. His father, Fred Trump, was a very successful, albeit rather ruthless, real estate developer himself. The family had lots of money. There was a Rolls Royce and a Cadillac parked in front of the house. There were 8 or 9 bedrooms. He went to good schools and so on. So life was good in many, many ways. And yet early on in Trump's mind, he came to see the world as a vicious place. And how did this come to be? The best I can come up with it is that it's a kind of a conspiracy here, if you will, between the genes and the environment. Okay. First of all, with the genes, Donald Trump, has a certain temperament. We're all born with a certain temperament profile. From what, if we were to believe the record on him, the historical record, he came into the world as a highly outgoing, dominant, kind of strong, aggressive little kid. Okay. So he's got these strong, aggressive tendencies anyway. He's the second son and the fourth kid in a family that ultimately had 5 kids. The firstborn son, Freddie, who's 9 years older, has a completely different temperament, much milder, much softer. The father, Fred, was looking for a killer. Okay, he used to compliment his boys by saying, "Boys, you need to be killers and you need to be kings," right? And Freddie tried to do that, but Freddie just didn't have what it takes. He never had the right kind of temperament, right? I mean, you can't do everything, no matter what your parents suggest. And Freddie tried hard and failed. And so that kind of leaves it to Donald. Well, Donald had the right temperament. Right. And so this whole idea of getting out there and being tough and fighting, that was like mother's milk for little Donald Trump. Right. He just sucked it up and it nourished him and so on. So he starts to move through life as a very kind of aggressive kid. And then, when you're really aggressive, you make the world aggressive around you. Okay, I think about Donald Trump in second grade. He's often talked about how he punched out his second grade music teacher. I don't know, the story may be apocryphal, but it gives you a sense of what he was like. So the little Q4 school where Donald Trump went to school at 7:30 in the morning, and everything's peaceful, right? And the kids show up at 8, and everything's nice. And then Donald Trump walks into the room, and suddenly it's a jungle. Right? Because he starts the arguments and the fights start going. And so, it was a tough world for Donald Trump because he made it like that. He walks into a situation and provokes, just like in the first day of his presidency, right? Yeah. The first thing he did was fight about the size of the inaugural crowd, right? He picked a fight. It was so obvious to everybody that this was not the biggest crowd in history. It drove the press crazy. Yeah. They attacked him from day one. And so Trump says, look, they're attacking me. The world is a vicious place, right? He loves, he has a quote from People magazine 40 years ago. He goes, this is my philosophy of life. Man is the most vicious of all animals, and life is a series of battles, ending in victory or defeat. Well, yeah, that's what it feels like when you're Donald Trump, because you started it, right? You got going, you got it going from the get-go. And so when you experience life like that, it reinforces those aggressive tendencies. So Donald Trump is not lying when he says that that is how the world feels to him. It's always felt that way to him. What he doesn't understand, I think, is that he makes the world that way for him. And then that world makes him even more aggressive.
Do you feel that what happened to Freddie from the pressure of Fred Trump Sr. made him kind of the way he is to protect himself? Or do you buy this other theory that I got from Justin Frank, who was a GW professor of psychology, that his mother being absent for a period of time when she got very ill, almost died from the birth of Robert, his younger brother, and that is considered why he can't have any attachments?
Yeah, I've never bought that idea, that one about the mother absence. Okay, so yes, Mary, Dr. Frank is correct in the sense that Mary Trump, his mother, did have problems with the fifth pregnancy, and she was sick and away from the family for a period of time. But this family had all kinds of help. There were aunts and uncles involved. There was a live-in maid who was very nurturant and protective for the children. So the fact that the mother was away during a particular period of time for and not that long, in my mind, doesn't really explain much. From what we know, and we don't know too much about Mary Trump, she seems to have been a more or less caring person who probably had reasonably decent attachment relationships with her kids. All of the kids speak highly of her, not just Donald Trump, but Marianne and all of them, that she was a good mom and so forth. So this kind of speculation about the mother absence and so forth, I don't buy it. I think instead what you have here is a young boy who comes into the world with a certain kind of temperament and so on, and then it gets magnified, as I suggested before. At the same time, though, it does leave open the question, why the narcissism, right? I mean, the aggressive temperament is one thing. There are a lot of aggressive people in the world, although maybe not quite as too many that are as aggressive as Donald Trump. But the unflagging narcissism, the focus on the self all the time, it never goes away. It's the first thing he thinks about in the morning, the last thing he thinks about at night. He never tires of seeing himself and reveling in his own self-perceived greatness. Where does that come from? And I just think we don't know. I mean, I think it's, maybe the mother not being there during a particular period, I don't know, maybe a little bit, but that's just not enough. I mean, the other kids in the family don't have this kind of narcissism. Narcissism is a great mystery. And I think, we have to sort of, at some point, as psychologists say, I'm not sure I can explain that. And the extremeness of it. I mean, there just are so few people like him. And then you combine the narcissism with the episodic nature of life. And so, I'm trying to imagine being as narcissistic as Donald Trump. I'm a pretty narcissistic person. I like myself. I think about myself. I'm promoting myself. I want people to buy my book. I got a lot of that. But, I get tired of myself. Okay. By 3 p.m, I'm thinking, give it a break, Dan. Okay. Donald Trump never does. He wakes up the next morning and there's that beautiful face of his in his mind, right? And he just can't get enough. And I'm thinking it has to do with that episodic nature. It's refreshed. It's like the computer screen is refreshed every morning and oh, there it is. It's beautiful. I'm not sick of looking at that. I've been looking at that for 65 years or so. I'll never tire of it.
I kind of wish I had that myself, to be able to have every day feel like a new day, which is what I'll lead off actually on the next segment about. You said he never graduated from childhood, and we'll look at your big five, the two that you have attached to Donald the most, when we get right back with our third segment.
Would you like to host your own radio program or podcast? Park City Productions 06604 is is a Bridgeport, Connecticut-based radio broadcast solutions company. Follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's Park City Productions 06604. Call us at 203-522-8801.
We're back with Dan McAdams. The book is The Strange Case of Donald J. Trump, A Psychological Reckoning. And I will ask you to comment on what you meant by never graduating from childhood. And then we're going to talk a little bit about Mary Trump's book for a second versus yours. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think many people have observed that there is something childlike about Donald Trump, or I like to think of it almost not only developmentally, but in terms of like the evolution of humankind. There's something very primal about him, right? I mean, he's kind of like a chimpanzee, and I actually mean that rather seriously in terms of his aggressiveness and so on. There are so many features of human life that go along with adulthood, that many of which are troubling, but they do enrich our lives, and that just don't seem to impact Donald Trump. Okay, we talked earlier about like not having a conscience, not having a lot of conflict, not having a lot of ambivalence, not having much of an inner life. And so, in some ways, he is exactly still like that, maybe as how he was in second or third grade. And in fact, he has said that. He has said, I'm pretty much the same person I was in first grade. Now, I think to be fair to him, he was talking about how aggressive he is and so forth. But I think he was actually telling a deeper truth. I mean, because in addition to having the same temperament, and many of us have similar temperaments to what we were like when we were 5 or 6, but all of the other things that get layered over, like a moral sensibility and so on, and a sense of like how you fit into society and taking on society's norms and respecting societal norms and institutions. I mean, you don't have to have a PhD or even much of education at all to kind of have a sense that you're part of society and that you need to kind of follow the rules. That just never kicked in for Donald Trump. So in that sense, I don't think he did graduate from childhood.
That's a great lead into the question I want to ask, because cheating is a way of life, is what Mary Trump said. You seem to me to have gone out of your way not to make, sort of armchair diagnoses of Trump, to remain a little bit more objective. I don't know if it's the Goldwater rule along with your thing, your tendency. Mary Trump's inside the family, and she has specifically felt that the father ruined his ability to engage with his own emotions, and get the full spectrum. Go ahead.
Right. Well, I have a great deal of respect for Mary Trump. I mean, she's shown a lot of courage to put this book together and so on. And she clearly has an insider's perspective and has access to information that the rest of us don't have. And so I think, she is better able than I am, to get across some of the emotional tenor of family life. Although she didn't grow up with Donald Trump. She's in the next generation, of course. And so she's sort of getting it secondhand from Marianne Trump and others in the family. But I think she has a certain perspective. So I think, if we add Mary Trump's perspective to what I've been writing about over the past 4 years, I think she does help show more clearly than I was able that Fred Trump really was a pretty toxic influence. At the same time, I think you can't dismiss Donald Trump's aggressiveness from the get-go and how that kind of meshed with Fred Trump's agenda for what he wanted his sons to do. In terms of the cheating and the lying and so forth, boy, I'll tell you this. I had a chapter in my book called Truth. And at the beginning of the chapter, I said, listen, I'm going to try to be like Donald Trump. I'm trying to empathize with him and just sort of imagine myself being him. And I could imagine a lot of things, and I could sort of do that for a while, but then I get stopped dead in my tracks because I just could never live with myself if I lied the way he lies. And I'm not talking about little lies here and there. I'm not even talking about big lies, like, in the case of Bill Clinton lying about an affair he had with Monica Lewinsky. That was a big lie. But I can imagine people doing that kind of thing. No, I'm imagining lies like the one about the crowd size in the inauguration, or the idea that, well, actually 99% of the time, the coronavirus, when you get it, you're fine. That's a lie. That's just wrong. And everybody knows it. His lies violate the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology. And even his supporters know that they are lies. And yet he does it day in and day out. And you think, God, that is shameless, right? And I keep coming back then to this sort of episodic nature, right? For Donald Trump, truth is what works in the moment, to win the moment, to win the episode. So the truth may be different on Monday than it is on Wednesday. And that would bother everybody else because the rest of us live in terms of a long-term story. But it doesn't bother Donald Trump because, again, each day is anew. So I think that's part of how he does it. The other part of it is, and this applies to his supporters too, Donald Trump, his supporters don't expect him to tell the truth. He's not here to tell the truth. That is not what Donald Trump is about. He can lie left and right. That doesn't matter. He's more important than that. He's like a superhero. He's this incredible mythic force who is here to deliver us from our suffering or to transform the world. So if he lies every day, I don't care about that, they're saying, because he's more than a person. He's like some Christian evangelicals, white evangelicals, see him as an instrument of God, right? So if you're an instrument of God or a superhero, right, who's going to quibble about lies? So in a sense, Mr. Trump is more than a person in their mind. But at the same time, he is less than a person too, because persons have inner lives and moral quandaries and principles, but he doesn't. Now, the weirdest thing of all here, other people see him that way. I also believe Donald Trump sees himself like that to a certain extent. He sees himself as more than a person, like a superhero, like a reality TV star that's like larger than life. But at the same time, at some level, I think he understands that he's less than a person too. And that's one of the reasons he can't relate to a lot of people. He can't show empathy for other people. He can't understand their suffering because it's not his.
Can I ask you a question? This dichotomy between saying he's so authentic, but he's a compulsive liar, that just seems incongruous. Secondly, does he know he's lying?
In terms of the second, he may know he's lying, but he doesn't respect the idea of lying, okay? And it's like, okay, yeah, I mean, you might call it that, right? But it's not a relevant concept for him, the idea of lying, because he's so transactional and so in the moment. Whatever works to win the moment is good, okay? So at most, what he might say is that this lie is a means to a bigger end, the end being my winning the moment. With respect to the first part and authenticity, when people see something and they say, yeah, that's authentic, what they typically mean is that's real. It's like, it's right there in front of me. It's real and unadulterated. So Donald Trump is very real. He is really lying too, but there's authenticity in that. When Donald Trump opens his mouth and lies about whatever it is he's lying about today, he's being completely authentic, right? Now, most of us, when we lie, we're not being authentic because we're trying to hide something and we're not showing our true self. But in that moment, Donald Trump is doing all he can to fight and win the moment. I analogize him also to a boxer. Okay, it's kind of like he's in the ring. Every day is a 3-minute round, and he's out there punching and so forth, and he's doing everything he can to win the round and survive the moment. He doesn't have time. The boxer doesn't have time to think about the niceties of moral principles and democratic institutions and all that kind of stuff. He's got to win the moment. And then he's done after 3 minutes. He goes back to the corner for a minute, and then he gets up, and he's refreshed to go again. And that's life for Donald Trump. And I think that's how he has lived his life, as exhausting as that would be to anybody else. That's how he's lived his life for 50 years.
All right, we got a minute to go. So he doesn't really know why he does this, but he's surrounded by intelligent staff and people on the Capitol Hill who support him, who have to essentially lie every day to support him, from a religious guy like Mike Pence on down. How are they dealing with this?
I don't know how they deal with it. I thought, as bad as he could be, he will surround himself with people who will mitigate him. But we have seen that his staff and so forth, they can't mitigate him, or they're almost powerless. I think part of it here, I mean, this isn't profound, but it's the appeal of the highest office in the land. I mean, when are you ever going to have an opportunity to be next to the seat of power, most powerful man on the planet? So you're there and you're doing everything you can, I guess, to try to make the best of the moment. But yeah, it's a losing proposition. And at the end of the day, I have to worry, I would worry about the verdict of history. I mean, how is history going to look back on these enablers like Pence and Pompeo and so Bolton while he was there?
All right, we'll be back with our final national segment coming right up. Our guest psychologist, Dan McAdams from Northwestern, expert on Trump. His biggest fear in life is losing. As we know, every day he's fighting. He's behind in the election. He has a big fear of any one-term president being ultimately labeled a loser. Will he be able to deal with this? And is he in meltdown now? Everybody's always said from the last 5 years, he's melting, but he's still Trump.
He's still Trump. I wouldn't count him out. He's been in tough situations before in the 90s. All those bankruptcies, Of course, he doesn't see them as bankruptcies, but I mean, like, he had some tough battles to fight. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't count him out at this, and I don't think he's deteriorating or melting down or anything like that. However, I also wouldn't, I wouldn't be completely flabbergasted if come October and he's still, let's say, 15 points down in the polls, and it becomes clear even to him that he's not going to win and there's no October surprise that he can pull out. Might he walk away? Yeah. I mean, I don't know. He could step back. He's already saying that the November election will be, I predict, the most corrupt in the history of American politics, right? Yeah. So he could say he's not going to be part of it or something like that. I think it's a long shot, but I wouldn't put it past him, because in the moment that might seem to him to be the way to go out a winner. And he's not thinking about history's verdict. He's not thinking, 20 years from now, how will they look back on this? He's in the moment. And so it's not inconceivable to me that he would do that.
What's it like to be down? You use the term vortex, void, black hole. Put yourself, like you said, you've tried to be in there. And is he miserably unhappy, even though he's attained this job through a miracle almost?
I don't think he's unhappy. He's not happy-go-lucky or anything like that. Yeah. But I get a sense that he's fighting the way he has his whole life. This is the largest stage you can have as President of the United States, most powerful position in the world. I think he's enjoying this quite a bit. This ride. He loves being in the limelight and so forth. In terms of the void, I end the book with a metaphor, almost like a black hole. Okay, and stars are going around the black hole, and I use it in two ways. First of all, Donald Trump, in the center of his personality, where we expect there to be a story about who he is and how he came to be, there is nothing there. There's a vacuum. So all these other parts of him, these features, his traits and so forth, they kind of are revolving around this void, this empty center. It doesn't make him unhappy. It's just a weird, scary psychological makeup. Beyond that, secondly, that's the position the rest of us are in too, in a sense. We have been for the last 3.5 years going around this void in the center. Like we're all like being sucked into this vortex, if you will, Donald Trump being in the center. It has been a very scary 3 years. And in particular, in the last few months, we've now seen how, the whole mirage of it, the idea that he could even be an effective leader, has evaporated.
Do you see him as an existential threat?
In what sense, Jim?
In terms of taking the country down.
Well, I think he's taken us down. I think our reputation in the world is in tatters at the moment. I mean, we are a laughing stock internationally. We have, and that happened even before the virus. But now with the virus and so forth, We're like a third world country. I mean, we can't fight this thing. Our medical, no, it's not all his fault. I mean, there's a lot of other problems, systemic problems, but any other leader, I mean, imagine George W. Bush or Barack Obama or Ronald Reagan or Jimmy Carter even in this situation would have spoken to the public as Angela Merkel did and as others did and rallied the entire country around this cause and put us in there for the long run. We are going to do everything we can to defeat this foe. We are going to marshal all of our resources. And he would inspire people. And yeah, it would be tough. We would all have to share in incredible sacrifices. And what did he do? He said, it's a moment in time. The virus may be gone tomorrow morning. He missed his opportunity, but then he could never have done it anyway because the virus is not about him and it's not about the long term. Donald Trump can only invest in himself in the short term. So we see how he failed as a leader there, and that the consequences are disastrous for our country, and we're just starting to see them.
Do you think that this has allowed people to see through the con?
Some people, I think.
Not the Trump cult, right?
Yeah, the Trump cult is still strong. I mean, the fact that he's polling, I guess I did see a poll recently with a pretty low approval rating, 39%. That's pretty low. He's never above about 48. He's rarely below 40. There's this solid core of support that he has no matter what. As he said, even if he shot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue, he'd still retain it. But you're starting to see some things. His support among Republicans is starting to come down a little bit. Independents hate him. The Democrats have always hated him. So we're starting to see through it, but still, it's kind of amazing. He's got 39% approval. It's not going up.
Do you think that he's indicative of a move to authoritarianism and the like, or is Trump a pure aberration the way you view him as this strange entity?
I hope he's an aberration. I mean, there have been, we see autocracies in other countries too, and in Poland and Hungary and so on. Brazil, they've got a dictator going there. But I think we're starting. I believe in democratic institutions. I believe in the American tradition of dispersal of powers. And so I'm thinking, it might be in a way that we look back on this as a reckoning and we say, yeah, we got pretty close there to autocracy, to an authoritarian kind of position. And then we backed off. I hope we back off. But if he wins a second term, then it's unbelievably bad.
If he doesn't walk away and he loses, will he be able to deal with that? Will he accept it? Do you see then some big meltdown, or I'm not leaving office, it's rigged, something like that, or not? Yeah,
I do see that. I don't know if I'd call it a meltdown. He'll never accept it as a defeat. I mean, ever. He never had a bankruptcy either, he'll tell you. But I guess the question is, will he leave the White House? And I think what will happen is, if he loses, he'll protest it for a long time. He'll say he won. He'll do everything he can to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the election. He'll threaten not to leave. There'll be a crisis. And then at the last second, he'll probably leave the White House. But I'm trying to imagine, will he sit there when they inaugurate Joe Biden and so forth? Will he involve himself in the transition the way Obama and every other president has? I can't see him doing it. I don't know how he'll do it, but maybe he will.
Just for 10 or 15 seconds, what if he's reelected? What does it mean for the country? 4 more years.
It means the biggest mistake we ever made, the second biggest being 2016 election. I'm trying not to imagine it, but I think it does fulfill all the fears about an authoritarian government in the United States.
All right, another fascinating time. Third time we've been with Professor McAdams. A strange case of Donald J. Trump, a psychological reckoning. Always does good work. It's not polemic or attack oriented. It's fact-based, tries to remain objective, and always a lot of fun to have him in Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Thanks to Dan. Thanks to our national audience. We're back for the next edition of Business Talk with Jim Campbell.
Recover Now is a national campaign aimed at the education and awareness of the devastating effects of opioid and heroin abuse and curbing drug and alcohol addiction in the United States. Recover Now is sponsored by treatment facilities nationwide. Many of them have been where you are, and they want to help by spreading a message of hope and recovery. They're working hand in hand with major insurance companies nationwide that can help you or a loved one get clean in 7 to 30 days. Recover Now is is embarking on a national outreach campaign on TV and radio to promote anti-addiction messages. So if you, a loved one, or someone you know has a problem with drugs or alcohol, do not wait. A new life for you could be 30 days away. Call us right now. I promise this call can change your life. Sponsored by the Detox and Treatment Helpline.
800-357-8110. 800-357-8110. That's 800-357-8110.